Thank you. Thanks very much. Before I begin, I'd just like to acknowledge my co-authors and supervisors, Dr. Karen Fruit and Professor Lindsay Nichols. Okay, so all people with primary progressive aphasia deal with the frustration of word-finding difficulties, particularly in the semantic variant and the logopenic variant. And people with logopenic variant PPA struggle with word-finding difficulties causing unfinished phrases, fillers, pauses, restarts. And so it's a commonly frustrating feature. Lexical retrieval treatment is the frequently used treatment, and there's positive, it's a relatively large body of evidence now demonstrating immediate or direct treatment gains for treated items. Reading and repetition in the presence of a picture is one way of delivering lexical retrieval treatment, and it involves errorless intensive practice of words that have personal relevance to the person with PPA. And in this study, reading and repetition in the presence of a picture is the intervention that we used to investigate the effect of both noun and verb production on sentence production, with the goal to identify therapeutic techniques that might improve functional communication, which is actually the goal of all our treatments. So despite the evidence for direct treatment gains, there's sparse evidence of generalisation of these gains to other words or to other contexts. And it's been a bit of a theme over the last couple of days that, generalisation, being able to demonstrate generalisation is a bit of a holy grail. So before we began this study, we decided to first test the assumption that if a person with PPA, gone too far, if a person with PPA learns a word via lexical retrieval treatment, are they actually then able to use that word in functional propositional language? So first we decided I'll explain the participant first. SC, a 67-year-old English-speaking right-handed female with a 2 to 3 year history of progressive aphasia. She had a confirmed diagnosis of logopenic about 14 months before we started these studies. She had typical profile of a logopenic variant type. She had spared semantics, spared syntax, her sentence comprehension and production was intact, and she had intact motor speech skills, but she had significant impairment of sentence repetition and naming. She was a university-level educated woman, retired, living alone independently, driving, socialising, and there were no reported changes in her behaviour or her personality, and she was highly engaged and motivated to do this treatment. So she's the participant in both these studies I'm going to describe. This first one is the preliminary study where we investigated the effect of facilitation on the ability to produce a sentence with a verb and an object noun. So the goal was to see if having the word there available enables the person to make the leap to producing a sentence. So in this study, she was asked to tell us what's happening in the picture under 3 conditions. The first condition was just the picture with nothing else provided. The second condition, the noun was provided, and oops, I've gone too quick again. And it was spoken and written. And in the third condition, the verb was asked. She was asked to provide the verb was provided with a spoken word and a picture. So what we saw was that there was a small improvement when the noun was provided. But more importantly, for SC, being provided with the verb was very helpful, and she was able to produce significantly more correct sentences when the verb was available to her. So this result prompted the treatment study that I'll now describe. And the aim of this second study was to see if lexical retrieval treatment of nouns and verbs improves sentence production. And our research questions were, will it improve naming of treated nouns? And previous literature suggests it should. Will it improve naming of treated nouns? Will that improvement of treated nouns be associated with improved sentence production? And that facilitation study suggested not. Would the lexical retrieval treatment resolve in improved naming of treated verbs? And stroke aphasia literature suggests that it should. And is improved naming of treated verbs associated with improved sentence production? And our facilitation study suggested that it should. So we developed our treatment materials from a set of 66 action pictures of people performing everyday activities. And this provided us with 66 nouns and 66 verbs. We divided them into 3 groups, evenly matched for phoneme length, syllable length and frequency. And we tested her production of a noun and a verb and then a verb-noun sentence at each of the testing points. And then we treated the nouns and the verbs, in different combinations in different phases of treatment. It was a multiple baseline crossover design. We first had took 3 baseline probes, as I described there, of nouns, verbs and sentence. Then we had a first treatment phase where, using reading and repetition in the presence of a picture, we treated the set 1 nouns and the set 2 verbs, and no treatment to the set 3 items. Following a 2-week washout period, we then had a second phase of treatment where we crossed that over and treated the set 1 verbs and the set 2 nouns, and again didn't treat the third set. But you know, Murphy's Law came into play, and she basically did no treatment at all in this second phase because she came down with the flu. So we had another 2-week washout period and decided to implement a third treatment phase, where fortunately we had the third set and treated the verbs in the third set, and I'll explain that, the reasoning for that in the results. So first, if we look at what happened to the nouns, here we have a graph showing the number of items correct across the 3 baselines and then the probe at the end of the first treatment period of reading and repetition in a quick picture. And that's the part that's outlined. We did 2 statistical tests. First, we looked at whether there was a trend for improvement across all the data points, testing points. Were the nouns better at the end of the phase than at the beginning? And yes, they were significantly better. Then we looked at the amount of improvement across the treatment phase, and there was a significantly greater change in the treatment phase for these set 1 nouns across phase 1. So therefore we have evidence that the treatment improved performance for the nouns that were treated in set 1. They were better at the end of the phase than at the beginning, and this improvement happened more in the treatment phase than in the pre-treatment phase. So now if we look at the untreated sets, here we're looking at set 2 nouns. They're not treated in this phase, and what we see is first that there is a significant improvement across that whole, all the testing points, but there's no significant effect in the treatment phase. These nouns weren't treated, and so this shows a practice effect, okay? Not an effect of treatment. And the same with set 3 nouns, okay? There's a practice effect, but not an effect of treatment. So for the nouns now, we can answer yes to our first question. The treatment does improve lexical retrieval. But more importantly, what about these sentences? We treated Flor in the hope that then she would be able to say sweeping the floor, or be better at producing sweeping the floor. But there was no improvement of the verb plus object production after the nouns of that set had been treated. There was no treatment effect. So then we looked at the verbs. Set 2 verbs were treated in phase 1, and here there was a significant trend again across the testing points of the whole phase. And the rate of change across the treatment phase was close to significant. We only could be significant at that lower rate. But this is still a nice trend and evidence that the verbs may be improved. There was no improvement in the set 1 and the set 3 verbs that were treated in this phase. So we have a positive answer to our third research question that yes, treatment did improve lexical retrieval of verbs. So we turn again now to, did that have a result in the sentences? And when we looked to see if this had an effect, you can see again across the testing points that's a significant change. And there's an improvement in the treatment phase, but again it's not quite reaching significance. So in phase 3, we attempted to replicate that finding, that effect of improved naming of the treated verbs. They were better at the end of the treatment at the phase. So yes. And they were associated with a trend to improving, but again it did not reach significance. So this was again what we saw in phase, with the set 2 verbs in phase 1, we saw again in the phase 3 with the set 3 verbs. But we didn't see any improvement in the set 1 verbs, in the sentences with the set 1 verbs because they hadn't received any treatment. So basically this adds to the evidence that people with logopenic variant PPA can benefit from lexical retrieval treatment. Treating the nouns improves them. It isn't associated with improved sentence production. Does lexical retrieval treatment result in improved naming of treated verbs? Yes. And is improved naming of treated verbs associated with improved sentence production? Well, we replicated the effect, and this is a generative condition, but the evidence for the generalisation is less persuasive. So why might this happen? Perhaps inability to access a required verb mid-sentence impairs production of the rest of the sentence, particularly for people with logopenic. Treatment of verbs may assist people with logopenic access object nouns as well as target verbs, and thus assist with the production of a complete utterance. This is just the first single case study. It's going to be a series. I'm hoping to do this with 6 to 9 participants, 2 to 3 of each variant, to see the different effects that we might get. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen. No time for questions for Kathleen. Everyone has so much to say today. Just bringing up the presentation for our next speaker, who has travelled all the way from Vietnam, Dien Lee.